Well, we know why we smell plastic. That's a first. What's up, guys, and welcome back to the infamous project. I am doing a follow-up video on my E60 M5 that after I did the valve cover gaskets, the car never really wanted to run right. And this is one of those rabbit holes, and we've seen it on the forums on these cars time and time again, or on the Facebook groups of no starts, throttle actuators, spark plugs, Hall sensors, aka throttle position sensors, coils, injectors, all of these parts that sometimes the computer isn't telling the information that we want to see, or it's telling us information, but not necessarily the right information. We got to start reading in between the lines, and it results in us throwing money and parts at these cars really, really fast. Now, if you guys aren't a DIYer such as myself, and you got to pay to get the car towed, or you're already at the dealer and now more diagnosis and everything else needs to be done, well, that's where those crazy $10,000 plus bills can come from. Now, I'm hoping that throughout this video and the process I've gone to, because it wasn't structured, I just sort of have random footage here and there of what I thought the problem was, or what I think it is at the time. And I even spoke about it on the podcast that I'm on in terms of, I thought I had it figured out, and I was just waiting on some throttle actuators to show up. It wasn't the throttle actuator on bank 2. Long story short, I had misfire codes. Bank 2 ended up shutting down. I ended up having injectors that were stuck open, and ultimately the root cause were the injectors. And in fact, it's probably not the injectors. It was probably low voltage going through the car due to a strained battery after doing the valve cover gasket that resulted in those injectors to want to stick open, flood the motor, cause misfires, make my intake plenum catch fire, and then shut down bank 2 as a result. And all because the Hall sensor. So it's a little bit of a spoiler, but you guys will get the whole story. So hopefully I've captured your interest at this point. What I'm going to show you right now, right here on the front of bank 2, and you've got this on the back of bank 1. Everything's symmetrical on this motor. This is your Hall sensor, like throttle position. It's got a flat blade that goes on behind it, and then it connects to this first throttle body. And what does that throttle body do? It's got a flat blade on the other side. So how do the two flat blades connect? Well, they connect with a little guy like this. And this one is broken and got a little warm. So needless to say, without this, there is no communication between what your throttle pedal is saying to your throttle actuator to your throttle body. Therefore, you cannot, the car will idle. So a lot of people think that when their throttle actuators are going out, that it's their idle is like hunting, or the idle is off. Guys, throttle actuators have nothing to do with your idle, because when you're idling, your throttle blades are closed. The voltage of your throttle body or throttle actuator values is pretty much 0 volts, maybe a little bit more, up to like 0.7 or something like that. But regardless, if you guys have idle issues, it's probably something else. So your throttle actuators are actually what are opening up the throttle blades to give you throttle response. So without this little guy, you can't do any of it. All right. So that is the intro, the preface to the video. Now let's hit that official little intro splash, and we'll come back and you guys can see my journey going through trying to get this car back on, just simply as a result of doing the valve cover gaskets. That's what started all of this. Trying to do the right thing. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And in fact, this is probably 10 steps back. But, you know, we validated the car has had replaced throttle actuators. The car now has new spark plugs. We got a couple more extra new coils in there. We got a brand new Hall sensor clutch installed on bank 2. And we got a new used plenum for that side because, well, the other one caught fire and melted. this is sort of the joys of BMW, where you take one step forward and then you end up taking 2 steps back. And I did fear this. I think I mentioned it in one way or another when we were doing that valve cover gasket, that I was afraid, because everything is so old, high mileage, brittle, that you never know what might break as a result of you trying to repair something else. So the valve cover gasket job itself went pretty smoothly. There was nothing out of the ordinary that we broke. In fact, there was just one clamp, the way one of the rear admission hoses came off the back. I ended up having to cut the, pressure band clamp style guy off and put a traditional gear clamp on there, but that's really not a big deal at all. And then when we fired the car up, there was a misfire in cylinders 2 and 8. So the next morning, I went and picked up 2 aftermarket coils, slammed them back into 2 and 8, fired the car back up, and then what did it have? Lambda Bank 2 or Lambda Bank 1, which was pointing at the upstream oxygen sensor. And guys, the amount of smoke that was pouring out of the back of this car, still with multiple misfires, was absolutely unreal. So even though that those misfires was with cutoff, so sometimes we get a code and it'll say misfire with cutoff. Well, the cutoff means that it's cutting fuel off from that injector to the cylinder so that you don't wash out the cylinder and keep pouring fuel when there's no spark. So that's a good thing. But what happened as a result to throw that lambda sensor off, I have no idea. It's pouring fuel out the back, like just running so rich. And that's really never a situation that you want. Number one, it's smelly, it's smoky. Number two, right, you don't need a bunch of extra fuel in your cylinders, because ultimately it's going to end up in your oil, and then you don't want to dilute your oil down. And lastly, it's not good. All of that running rich means a whole bunch of extra soot and everything else, because it's not burning off properly. It'll get covered on your spark plugs, covered on your sensors, and it's not a good thing to have. So I shut the car down, reset the codes, and at this point, the battery was running pretty low, probably because in a situation like this, even though we did disconnect the battery, you got hoods up, you got trunks up, you got all this other stuff, and trying to start the car up, I felt like the battery just wasn't getting enough voltage to the starter, because it would sort of like start and then stop. And I'm like, well, the battery is 3 years old. Let me see about charging the battery up. We'll let the car sit, so that way, if we did flood out cylinders, we'll just let the fuel evaporate. So put the charger on the battery on the AGM setting, which takes a long time, might I add, and let that sit overnight. Came back the next morning, and what happened? Cylinders 2 and 8 still misfired, which made absolutely no sense to me. I'm like, well, did I get a bad coil? So I grabbed another one of the coils that I thought was bad, and I jammed it into cylinder number 2, fired the car up, and the car was running better, and just said cylinder number 8 misfire. So I'm like, maybe the plugs got fouled, right, as a result of running super rich. Maybe there's a bad coil. And guys, this is why when you start chasing problems, especially with your BMWs, and you don't have a baseline, or you deviate away from your baseline too quickly, meaning you start throwing parts, random parts at the problem without doing a step-by-step process, you can really start to rattle your brain and not know what you did to either break or possibly make better or repair and completely fix the situation. So by me pulling out some coil packs, moving them around, and then letting stuff sit and resetting codes and doing this and doing that, the other important thing is that when a battery is low in a BMW, things don't want to work properly. I've heard of motors turning over, but not enough power to provide spark to the coils. Or, your SMG is going to start acting up. All of these different things, which bad batteries are not good in BMW. So what I did today is, because I sort of lost my baseline, if you will. I do know which coil goes to which cylinder at this point, where I believe they are all good coils. And in fact, I think that even when I originally had the cylinder 2 and 8 misfire, except for the coil that we butchered up, there was one that this guy definitely wasn't looking that great after the fact, but that's not to say, as long as the connectors are good, that that's a bad coil. And here's this guy. Doesn't even look like there's anything wrong with this. You know, and sometimes things are ironic, right? Sometimes things happen just by pulling it out and putting it back in. Maybe it kicked the bucket. That could happen, but in this case, I think we ran into a situation, the cam sensors were out, even though I reset the adaptations and did all of those things. BMWs are quirky, and sometimes we just do not have the answers to what's going on. So what did I do today? I went and I bought a brand new battery. The old one's sitting here on the floor. Brand new battery is not even fully charged from O'Reilly's. So it's in AGM mode. And considering the second light is still flashing, it's probably going to need about 5-6 hours, which means this video will be concluded in the morning. Aside from that, the coil packs, we really don't know if they're good or bad. For whatever reason, on my X-Tool scanner, with all the features that it has, I can't find the feature where it will test the coils. My friend's scanner, I remember on my E39, I could test each individual coil and it would let you know if it's doing what it's supposed to do. Couldn't find it for this one. If I can figure out the setting in there, that would be great, but like everything else seems to be working. I tested the throttle actuators. I tested the idle valves. Went through and did all the testing. I opened it up and I checked the live data when the car's cranking over, and I can see the Van House solenoids giving their degree angles and everything else. So I personally think, and that's why all the coil packs are off, that somehow we severely flooded. And you know, like look at these plugs. These are actually, they're pretty caked up with some carbon and everything else on there, and the gaps that's looking a lot bigger, especially considering how black that is, and black slimming versus the 32 thou that they're supposed to be. So all of the plugs nasty looking. A couple of them were even wet, which is definitely what you do not want. So I am changing the plugs, and that's why we're here today. So same NGK plugs that were in the car. These are a LK R8AP, and just wanted to make sure that I did get the same ones. I did. And doing the plugs, which we should have done when we did the valve covers, but the reality is they're not that hard to get to. All right, you just take the air boxes off, take the coolant tank off here, and just fold it over to the side, and you can get access to all of your plugs with ease. The only one that's a little trickier is the one in the back. So your cylinders number 5 and 10. I use 2 smaller extensions so that you put your spark plug socket. So you would put, all right, and you can do this for all of them in reality. So this will slip down there as one piece. Then you put one more extension on. Then you can get your socket wrench, and then when you're pulling it out, you pull this extension off, and then there's enough room to get the one extension with the spark plug socket off in one go. So I'm going to put the new plugs in. Like I said, gapped at 32 thousandths, and the torque I believe is about 16 foot-pounds. When you're dealing with aluminum, guys, you do not need to send it when you're putting these spark plugs down. So just pretty much, get the seat of the plug to sit, and then you get a pretty good snug feeling on your wrench, and you're good to go. So the name of the game now is I'm actually letting the cylinders breathe. So that way, if there's any fuel that's remaining in there, that should absorb off and ventilate into the air here. And probably first thing tomorrow morning, I'll jam the plugs in, jam the coils on. The battery is going to be fully charged, and hopefully we'll crank and this thing will fire up, and it'll be the end of the saga of trying to do the right thing and then getting burned. I guess I really should have done the plugs to begin with. And I really feel good about this, provided that the car starts up and does everything that it's supposed to do, because I do have a buyer who's super interested and wants to come pick up the car this week. So if I don't fix the problem, this could be a parts car. You never know, because when you get into big problems with an E60 M5, it doesn't take much for you to just say, that's it, I'm throwing in the towel. This baby is parts. And it would be a sad day, right? Because I've been dealing with those leaky valve covers for almost a year. We're 3 weeks away from me having this car for a whole year now. And, you know, those valve cover gaskets, they just got really, really bad. So that's it, guys. We'll resume in the morning and see if this thing won't fire back up and be the beast that it was, and carry on to be the beast and maybe hit 300,000 miles. All right, the battery is charged up. It is now the moment of truth. I will open the garage door. Fingers crossed, in hopes that this thing is gonna fire right up. All right, guys, moment of truth. No. This thing definitely does not want to start, guys. Oh, and I can't get any codes off it. This might turn into a parts car for me. Coil's out, plug's coming out, compression tool is out, and we actually had this car running. Believe it or not, I think that the cylinders were washed so bad, the compression, so we have done a compression test before, we were like 30-40 PSI, which is nothing. And we put like 2 teaspoons of oil down each cylinder, put everything back together, and the car fired. Problem was a couple of misfires and shut the car off, and then it didn't want to start again. So we're on to something. We're gonna have to validate all these coils are sparking before we fire it up again, but we'll see what this is saying. If the compression is low, then we'll know we're just getting too much fuel, and there was a misfire on cylinder 1. And
shitty compression.
all the spark plugs are coming out yet again. I got a technique, it actually doesn't take that long. And from there, yeah, we'll check the compression. We're gonna check every single coil and make sure that they're all sparking, because that could be a little bit of the issue here. Again, brand new spark plugs, so we know we're good there. And it's just a matter of making sure that those cylinders, right, they saw too much fuel. When the restarts went, probably clearing all of the adaptations, everything else that the car was used to and knew how to run, well, that kind of all went away. So lessons learned here. We do know the car will run to a certain extent. We just need it running again on all cylinders. All right, so now we are testing each individual coil by resting it near metal, just to make sure. Ready? So by having the plug in there and grounding it out, allows us to validate that the coil is doing its job. That looks like a newer one.
This one's a new one, I think.
All right. So rinse and repeat 10 times and we'll report back. The old oil down the cylinder trick. Little funnel, piece of hose, some 1060.
Working with what we have.
In case you guys are wondering, while the motor's been turning over and cycling and doing all this, we disconnected the fuel pump, and there are so many videos out there on how to, well, it doesn't really tell you much in terms of how to disable your fuel pump. This is an 06, so pre-LCI. I could not figure out the relay or the fuse for it, so I just popped the rear seat out and popped the clip off the pump right there. And that way we can make sure that we're not feeding any more fuel through the cylinders than we need to. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So Dale's putting oil down. I'll go through, start putting the plugs back in. We cleaned all those off with brake clean. Again, all the coils have been tested. We know they're all sparking and doing their thing. So this time when the car fires up, we're just gonna have to let it run and just let it keep running to the point that hopefully it clears itself out and learns and adapts and does all the things that it needs to do. All right, guys, moment of truth. Everything is back together for the most part. You know, stuff like little caps and covers and stuff are still off, obviously, but fuel pump's still disconnected. Fingers crossed it'll want to fire, and then we'll hook the fuel pump back up. Fuel pump now engaged. Okay. Oh, smoke show. I think we have more cylinders running this time. Definitely not all 10, but we're doing better than the 6 we had before. So now we can't shut the car off. We'll pull the scanner, see what it says. Let things clean out a little bit. Dude, we don't even have a misfire. It's just running kind of shitty. Let me try my other scanner. Cylinder 8, cylinder 7. 1, 7, and 8. It's weird that the other computer didn't pull that up. Well, we know why we smell plastic. That's a first. All right, so now that the shock has left, because to be honest, I was shocked. I was not expecting to see melted holes in the upper intake manifold on this car. And it explains the smell of plastic that was burning that we smelt. So aside from just being in disbelief, because the car legitimately could have caught fire, and it didn't, thankfully. It's still here, it's still kicking, and we got, right, both intakes off yet again. And I'm assuming the GoPro should be able to see all that fuel sitting down in cylinder number 1? Well, funny enough, there's fuel just like that in cylinder number 8. And that's why everything is kind of stuck open right now. We cleaned up the throttle bodies, and the blades still need a little bit of cleaning there. From these 2 cylinders took the most of the fire episode. So with a bunch of fuel being pulled in here, fuel being pooled in number 8, which I can probably show you guys. I'm sure there's still some in there. And you can see it down in there. Not as bad as it was. It's been slowly evaporating out here. So what we think happened is that when we were messing around, we first pulled the plugs out, right? We took like a barbecue lighter and lit it in each spark plug hole and just burnt out any, leftover fuel, because we knew that there was tons of fuel that was pooling up in places. And when Dale did number 1, there was actually a flame that just kept burning. Like, it was lit and there was a flame slowly burning out of that cylinder for probably a good 20 seconds. And didn't really think anything of it other than, okay, yeah, there must have been, a lot of fuel that's burning off, versus some of the other cylinders that vaporized, right? It was just a quick, you ignite it and poof, right? And Dale lost a little bit of hair on his hands on a few. But with that said, even though we pulled the spark plugs and, burnt out any excess fuel that was in the cylinders, poured the oil down to give us compression back in the motor, and all the things, what I think happened is that fuel was pooled sitting on top of the valves, just like we see it on cylinders 1 and 8 right now. And as a result, when the car started the second go around, I think a flame like that one that was burning when we used a barbecue lighter, I think that flame lit up and it was burning into the intake the second we started the car. And when we started driving it, well, what's happening? It's getting a bunch of air and sucking it in through the intake. And cylinders 6 and 7, well, they're the ones, the flame's going to go towards the air. I could be wrong with this. This is just sort of what I've come up with now that I've sort of come off the shock of all of this. And it just melted the inside of the trumpets within the intake plenum, if you will. So that's what I'm assuming happened. Tomorrow, our game plan is we're going to wheel the car outside. We are going to blow any excess fuel out of, right? So with the throttle blades open like they are now, compressed air, blow them all out. And at that point, we're just going to start the car with the intake off, or try and start it and see what happens and kind of go from there. The fuel pump, we'll have that disconnected. We'll kind of do the same approach as we did before. Hopefully we don't need to pull all the plugs out, but we very may well have to. Like, the car was running on nothing on this bank. By the time that we got the car home, limping it, I'm surprised it even ran and got us home. So it was probably only running on 3 cylinders. So the poor car has had its work cut out for it over the past couple days here, but fingers crossed it's not ready to die yet. I've already found another driver's side intake on eBay for like $85 shipped, which I thought they'd be expensive, but they're not. So anyways, we'll come back tomorrow. We'll mess around with this some more and try and get this beast running, because it's a disappointment. It really is. Like, all this because I did the valve cover gaskets. Like, if I had spun a bearing or, sent a rod at the side of the block, I'd probably feel better about the situation. But something like this, never would have seen it coming. So anyways, stick around. We'll figure it out. Blow out the fuel. Holy.
Well, that's not what I wanted to do. I'll do it this way, maybe.
Holy shit. That's more than a little bit of fuel.
Yeah, it's a lot. Here, I'll hold that. Or just blow it.
Well, I know, but I mean, in general.
You have the fuel rails out and shit?
No. Never touched them.
Honestly,
Let's see here. See, the plugs might so wet. Yeah, we'll just like let it get whatever fuel out. Flow. So cylinder 1, cylinder 8, misfire cylinder 4, and 10. Tank empty on full air.
Look at it. Look at the injector.
Oh fuck, yeah, it's staying on.
Let's open this one quick. This one was doing the same thing. Those two injectors. That was a lot of fuel.
That's what you got to do in the Austin area if you need BMW parts. You come down this secret road to see a gentleman named Woody who's got every single BMW part you could ever imagine. And the worst part is we were actually here yesterday for intake plenum, and we're back again. And it's not a close drive by any means. And this is about as far as we probably want to go. Look at all the stuff. You got rear ends, front ends, motors, wheels, tires, more motors, look at that, BBS wheels, bumpers. Got the goods. All right, so small update on the M5. Got the two injectors swapped out. They're no longer pouring fuel in. The car starts and idles, and of course does not rely on the throttle actuators for idle. Now the problem is bank 2 is throwing issues. So here is the throttle actuator for bank 2. Currently, oh wait,
there. Hold on.
Yeah, well, let me jump start it here. So we pulled it apart. All right, and the motor is working and no teeth. I thought maybe the melted plastic would have fried some teeth inside here, but everything looks good. So which leads us to believe it could be a circuit board related issue. Maybe when plastic melted and kind of bound up on the throttle bodies, it was trying to move and couldn't move. But we're going to try and plug this thing back together and see what happens. But yeah, it's just to put it in perspective, bank 1 at idle, the percentage value is about 4. This guy was sitting at 40%. And if we manually pushed on the actuator rod to open up the throttle blades, of course this is with the car running, it's not receiving anything, it's not firing the injectors to spray more fuel, and it is reading, but the, I guess, ground or the benchmark, if you will, has now shifted to 40 and then goes up to like 100 and then back down to 40. So it's just not reading the right values. So we'll try plugging it back in. If it doesn't do it, then we'll have to try another throttle actuator or see what else is going on. All right, Friday night, misty rain. UPS just dropped off our new used throttle actuator. So we're gonna get that bolted on real quick and we'll hook up the scanner and make sure it's reading the way that it should. If it is, we'll fire the motor as is, make sure everything's good. And then if it is, we can put the plenums back on and call it a day.
Maybe there is still a fuse. It's gone in as default. Hey, plugged in.
Okay. So let's do actuation test. Throttle. No. And it's still saying What a dick. Throttle, still saying 41%. Here's the culprit. Something spun in here on the rectangle, so I got to see. This does look usable still. There's enough area for the shafts to slide in. I'm just wondering if this got locked up and something odd happened, but we need to get those values within spec so that those throttle or that throttle actuator will work. But yeah, throttle position is the culprit in the end. So I looked online. I reached out to my used parts guy. I reached out to dealership, and it seems these like Turner, FCP Euro, all of those places, this is all 4 to 5 weeks for this to come in from Germany. So upon closer inspection, because last night we were trying to fight the rain and everything else, the elements, and of course frustration that the car wouldn't run. So this is the TPS side, and when you look at this side, everything looks okay. And it was weird that I couldn't get that percentage value for the throttle actuators, right? It was stuck at around 41% and I couldn't see 0 on it. So the interesting thing about this guy is that, see how the rectangle is, I guess, vertical in this sense, so up and down. And if I were to just flip this directly around, notice how it is not vertical, it's actually offset. So that is an interesting fact. And of course, this side saw a little bit of heat from that fire. And if we look really close, there's a small crack, hairline crack right here. So what I think happened is that this guy got warm enough and then cracked from the throttle, I guess the throttle blades or the arm, and it skipped. So, right, when I rotate this, see how that value changes? We want this to be pretty much 0. So let me see if I can find that position or that orientation. I should say it's flat, which looks like it would be like this. Well, listen to my diesel purr away here, and success. I cannot believe it. Guys, that stupid little Hall sensor clutch, and Hall sensor being the throttle position sensor, or a different name for it. So Woody had the part. I needed to go out there yesterday, made the 2-hour return trek in the rain and shitty weather, but knowing that if I didn't get that part last night, I wouldn't have been able to sleep. So went and got it, installed it. The throttle actuator still wouldn't go, but that margin, that percentage was lined up. I got it to about 1% with everything closed. I disconnected the battery, let it sit overnight to reset all of the adaptation values and everything else. Came out here this morning and hooked up the battery, hooked up the scan tool. The sensor reset itself back down to 0, and engaged the throttle actuator with the live test on the scan tool. And lo and behold, the bank opened up, fired the car up, fired up immediately, even with the intake plenums off. Of course, it's throwing codes right now for air intake temp and mass airflow. So you can see there was a Vanos pressure historical thing, probably just from the initial startup with no adaptations, but that has cleared itself up. And these are the codes that we have. So we'll get this stuff back on the car, get everything tightened up, reset our codes, start the car up, and this guy should be good to go. So really happy about that. It's unreal how a part's so small, and I don't even know if I have that old one laying around. I probably do, but you guys saw it, and it was so brittle, even though I tried to plastic weld it because I didn't think I was going to get one in time, but it was too distorted. I couldn't get the values for that Hall sensor to be within spec, and that's why the DME wouldn't allow anything to operate on bank 2. So hopefully this helps someone out there. I've learned a lot, a little frustrating, but the fact that this car is running and back operable again, and 213,000 miles with more life left to give. You can see now that the car is heat cycled, the Vanos is quieted down. I'll probably do a Vanos bleed on it. We'll get an oil change done. You can see the liquid moly sitting over there, ready to go. And make sure that any of the fuel that got into the oil from those two sticking injectors gets cleared up, and that'll be the end of it. So there we have it. Thank you guys for tuning in. Till next time, we'll see you back here on the Infamous Project.